There are moments in a year when the sky seems to gather multiple stories into a single chapter, and tonight feels exactly like one of those moments. Before you dismiss what you have been sensing lately as stress, overthinking, or emotional exhaustion, pay close attention, because something extraordinarily concentrated is unfolding overhead. For weeks, subtle currents have been building beneath the surface of everyday life, creating pressure in places many people have tried to ignore. Relationships feel different, conversations feel heavier. Decisions that once seemed easy suddenly carry consequences that are impossible to overlook. Most people can feel that something is shifting, yet very few understand why. What makes this evening remarkable is not any single astrological event on its own. It is the fact that several powerful celestial movements are converging simultaneously, creating a rare crossroads that demands a response. The summer solstice arrives. The sun enters Cancer. The first quarter moon forms. Each event would be significant on its own, but tonight they merge at the same cosmic threshold, amplifying one another in a way that transforms their meaning entirely. Once you understand how these energies are weaving together, it becomes difficult to look at your current circumstances the same way again. What I keep returning to is a feeling that this night is not offering options as much as it is demanding clarity. There are moments when life allows you to postpone decisions, to delay uncomfortable truths, to remain suspended between two paths while convincing yourself there is still time. This does not feel like one of those moments. The atmosphere surrounding tonight carries the unmistakable weight of inevitability. It feels as though the universe has reached the point where avoidance is no longer acceptable. A choice must be made. Not next week, not after more reflection, not after another cycle of hesitation. Tonight presents the kind of turning point that exposes what has already been true beneath the surface. And for 3 zodiac signs in particular, the energy surrounding this moment appears even more profound. What arrives now may feel less like a decision and more like a long overdue balancing of scales. Situations that have been developing quietly for months, perhaps even years, seem poised to reach a point of undeniable recognition. If you have recently found yourself trapped inside a strange emotional tension, especially within close relationships, there is a reason. Perhaps you have felt as though something needs to change. Yet every attempt to identify the problem leaves you frustrated. Perhaps there is an invisible pressure sitting in your chest that follows you throughout the day. Maybe there are conversations waiting to happen, truths waiting to be spoken, boundaries waiting to be drawn, and yet no clear path forward has appeared. If any of that sounds familiar, do not dismiss it. The energy building now is not random. There is a deeper mechanism operating beneath it, and understanding that mechanism changes how you experience everything unfolding around you. To understand why this evening carries such unusual intensity, we have to look carefully at what is occurring in the sky. The sun crosses into Cancer at 0 degrees. A short time later, the moon enters Libra at 0 degrees. Then the first quarter moon perfects at 0 degrees and 32 minutes of Libra, forming a square to the sun positioned at the identical degree in Cancer. On paper, those numbers may seem technical, but in astrology they carry extraordinary significance. The reason lies in the nature of 0 degrees within the cardinal signs. Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn all share what astrologers refer to as the Aries point. This is where events become impossible to contain. Imagine a microphone attached to your inner world. Everything hidden within you suddenly becomes amplified. Emotions that have remained private begin seeking expression. Issues that have stayed behind closed doors demand acknowledgement. Patterns that once operated quietly in the background step into plain view. The Aries point functions like a bridge between personal experience and external reality. What exists internally can no longer remain concealed. This is why the choices made under this influence are unlikely to remain invisible. Decisions formed tonight may create visible consequences across the coming weeks, and perhaps even months. Their effects do not stay confined within your thoughts. They move outward into your relationships, your environment, and your daily reality. Adding even more urgency is the nature of the first quarter moon itself. This phase is fundamentally different from quieter lunar moments associated with contemplation or observation. The astrologer Dane Rudyard described the first quarter moon as a crisis in action. That phrase matters because it captures the essential energy of what is unfolding. During the new moon in Gemini on June 14th, something began. An idea, a realization, a truth, a possibility. Like a seed placed beneath the soil, it remained hidden from view while silently developing. Tonight represents the moment that hidden growth reaches resistance. It encounters the surface. It either pushes through into visible existence or remains trapped beneath it. The period of waiting reaches its conclusion. Delaying action becomes increasingly uncomfortable because the energy itself is demanding movement. If you've spent the entire week feeling unusually restless, emotionally charged, or unable to ignore certain issues, there is a reason. You're not imagining it. In many ways, your awareness has already been responding to the approach of this lunar phase before it fully arrived. But the most important piece of this story lies in the emotional conflict created by the square itself. Once you see the dynamic clearly, many of the feelings you have struggled to explain begin making sense. The sun moving through Cancer illuminates one of the deepest instincts within the human experience, the desire for emotional security. Cancer concerns protection, belonging, home, family, and the people whose well-being matters most. It activates the part of you that constantly evaluates whether your foundation is stable, whether you feel supported, whether the emotional structures supporting your life can truly be trusted. Under this influence, questions about safety become impossible to ignore. Yet at the very same time, the moon occupies Libra, introducing an entirely different priority. Libra seeks balance, harmony, cooperation, fairness. It wants relationships to function smoothly. It prefers compromise over conflict. It often chooses accommodation over confrontation. This is the part of the psyche that willingly absorbs discomfort if doing so preserves peace. It is the voice that says, perhaps it is easier not to make waves. Perhaps it is better to adjust, to tolerate, to keep everything pleasant. And this is precisely where tonight's challenge emerges. The deeper you examine this energy, the clearer the dilemma becomes. If maintaining harmony requires sacrificing your emotional well-being, you slowly disconnect from your own needs. You preserve peace externally while creating instability internally. Yet if you move entirely into self-protection, building walls around every vulnerability and shutting others out completely, you lose access to the very connection your heart still longs for. This is the crossroads hidden within tonight's astrology. The tension many people are feeling is the tension between those two competing needs: the desire to protect yourself and the desire to remain connected, the desire to speak honestly and the desire to avoid disruption, the desire to honor your truth and the desire to keep everyone comfortable. What makes this evening so powerful is that the sky no longer supports remaining suspended between those positions. The middle ground that once felt manageable begins disappearing. The pressure increases because life is asking for an answer. Not a perfect answer, but a real one. And as we move deeper into what this alignment is awakening, the implications become even more impossible to ignore. What makes the pressure of this night impossible to ignore is that the emotional story unfolding now did not suddenly appear out of nowhere. Long before this lunar turning point arrived, the deeper truth had already begun pushing its way toward the surface. If you have been sensing that a relationship, a partnership, or an important connection in your life feels different lately, there is a reason the atmosphere has become so charged. The current tension is not the result of a single conversation, a temporary misunderstanding, or an isolated disagreement. It is the result of something that has been accumulating beneath the surface for far longer than most people realize. And when we trace the astrological sequence that led to this moment, one particular event stands out as the point where everything started becoming impossible to hide. On June the 16th, Venus in Leo formed an opposition to Pluto in Aquarius. This was not a gentle influence. It was not the kind of transit that allows people to continue pretending everything is fine. Venus governs relationships, affection, values, attraction, and the ways people connect with one another. Pluto operates in an entirely different way. Pluto exposes. Pluto uncovers. Pluto reveals what exists beneath appearances. When these two forces oppose one another, the comfortable masks people wear often begin to crack. Dynamics that once remained hidden suddenly become visible. Motivations that were difficult to identify become easier to recognize. Emotional negotiations taking place behind the scenes rise into awareness. The result is often uncomfortable because it removes the illusion that harmony alone is proof of health. Many relationships can appear stable on the surface while carrying unresolved imbalances underneath. What this Venus-Pluto opposition did was bring those imbalances into the light. The pressure you may be experiencing now did not begin tonight. It began when this transit started exposing realities that could no longer remain concealed. Suddenly, people found themselves noticing things they had overlooked before. They became aware of sacrifices they had normalized. They started questioning whether the emotional exchanges in their lives were truly balanced. They began recognizing patterns that had existed for much longer than they wanted to admit. And now the first quarter moon arrives as a point of activation. If the Venus-Pluto opposition opened the door, tonight demands that you decide what to do with what has been revealed. This is why the current energy feels far more significant than a temporary rough patch. The issue at hand is not simply whether a disagreement can be resolved. The deeper question concerns whether certain relational structures can withstand the weight of honesty. Can the foundation support the truth now that the truth is visible? Can a connection evolve once reality replaces illusion? Those are the questions moving through the collective atmosphere tonight. Yet there is another layer to this story that shifts everything into even sharper focus. In fact, this next piece may be one of the most important developments connected to the entire experience. To understand the emotional intensity surrounding this moment, we have to examine what occurred on June 19th. That was the day Chiron, often known as the wounded healer, completed a major transition by leaving Aries and entering Taurus for the first time since 1984. This shift is profound because Chiron moves slowly, and wherever it travels, it draws attention toward areas of pain that require awareness, integration, and ultimately healing. Since 2018, Chiron has been journeying through Aries. For years, collective and personal healing work has centered around themes connected to identity, individuality, self-assertion, courage, and the fundamental right to exist as your authentic self. During this period, many people confronted wounds related to visibility, confidence, independence, and self-definition. Now, the focus has changed. Chiron's movement into Taurus redirects attention toward an entirely different landscape. Taurus governs self-worth, security, resources, physical embodiment, and the deeply rooted beliefs people carry about value. Not simply financial value, but personal value. The belief that you deserve stability. The belief that you deserve comfort. The belief that you deserve love without constantly proving your worth through effort, sacrifice, or self-denial. This transition has introduced a remarkably vulnerable energy into the collective field. Over the last several days, many people may have noticed subtle emotional reactions that seem to emerge unexpectedly. Old insecurities, forgotten disappointments, long-standing doubts about deserving more from life. The experience resembles discovering an old scar you barely remembered existed. It is not reopened through force. Instead, it is touched gently enough that you suddenly become aware it never fully disappeared. What makes this especially important is how directly it connects to the events unfolding tonight. Early this morning, at exactly 6 o'clock, the Sun in Cancer formed an exact sextile to Chiron in Taurus. Astrologically, this creates a supportive channel between emotional awareness and healing. The Cancer Sun illuminates emotional needs, safety, protection, and inner nourishment. Chiron in Taurus illuminates wounds connected to worthiness and value. Together, they create a bridge that allows something hidden to become visible. And this is where a powerful realization begins emerging. What if the challenge many people believe is about relationships is actually rooted in something deeper? What if the imbalance they continue tolerating exists because a part of them has never fully accepted that they deserve something healthier? What if the reason certain words remain unspoken is because some hidden part of the psyche still doubts its right to be heard? What if the constant accommodation of other people's needs reflects an old belief that personal needs matter less? These questions are uncomfortable because they move beyond blaming circumstances and into examining the relationship you maintain with yourself. Chiron's role is not to create the wound. Chiron reveals the wound that was already there. The healing begins when awareness arrives, and that awareness appears to be arriving now. The lesson emerging through this energy is not about becoming dramatic or turning every issue into a confrontation. It is about recognizing the difference between peace and self-abandonment. It is about understanding that protecting someone else's comfort should not require sacrificing your own well-being. It is about acknowledging that emotional security matters. Your needs matter. Your voice matters. Your sense of value matters. And once that realization reaches the heart instead of remaining trapped in the mind, the choices presented by this first quarter moon begin looking very different. Suddenly, the path forward becomes easier to recognize because it is no longer filtered through self-doubt. Yet even that is not the final piece of the puzzle. There is another influence operating in the background tonight, one that introduces an entirely different quality into the experience. It is the reason everything feels charged with anticipation. It is the reason so many people sense that something unexpected is approaching. Uranus in Gemini is currently forming a square to the lunar nodes. The south node remains in Virgo, representing familiar habits, established patterns, excessive analysis, and the tendency to seek certainty through endless mental processing. The north node occupies Pisces, symbolizing intuition, faith, trust, surrender, and the willingness to follow guidance that cannot always be explained logically. Standing between these 2 points is Uranus, the planet most associated with disruption, liberation, awakening, and sudden breakthroughs. Uranus does not slowly persuade. Uranus interrupts. It delivers insights that arrive without warning. It introduces information that instantly changes perception. It creates moments where an entire narrative collapses because one overlooked truth suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. This is why tonight carries such an unpredictable quality. Many people may experience a realization that arrives with startling speed. It could emerge through a conversation. It could arrive through a message. It could surface during a quiet moment alone. Regardless of how it appears, the effect is often the same. One piece of information changes everything. One realization reorganizes months of confusion. One truth illuminates a pattern that was previously hidden. And once that awareness arrives, returning to the previous perspective becomes impossible. Perhaps someone's intentions become clear. Perhaps the reason behind a recurring relational struggle suddenly makes perfect sense. Perhaps an inner truth you have resisted acknowledging finally speaks loud enough to be heard. Whatever form it takes, Uranus appears poised to deliver the catalyst that pushes events toward resolution. It is the spark that transforms tension into action. It is the insight that turns uncertainty into clarity. And as this wave of awareness moves through the collective atmosphere, one sign in particular is approaching a moment where avoidance is no longer sustainable. Aries, the time for postponing a necessary conversation has reached its limit. Now we arrive at the part of this story where the energy becomes deeply personal, because while everyone is feeling the pressure of this first quarter moon in some way, there are three signs that appear to be standing directly in the path of its most transformative effects. And the first sign that keeps drawing my attention is Aries. Aries. If you have Aries as your sun sign or your rising sign, this lunar configuration is activating the axis connected to your 4th house and 7th house, the domains associated with home, family, emotional roots, and significant partnerships. These are not casual areas of life. These are the places where your deepest vulnerabilities live. These are the spaces where loyalty, trust, belonging, and emotional security become impossible to separate from the choices you make. And what stands out to me is that the behavior many Aries individuals have been displaying recently feels surprisingly unlike their natural instincts. Aries energy is usually direct. It is bold. It moves toward conflict when necessary, rather than away from it. Yet lately, there seems to have been a different pattern unfolding. Perhaps you have been investing tremendous amounts of emotional energy into someone who has not been meeting you halfway. Perhaps you have continued giving, supporting, helping, understanding, and carrying more than your share of the weight while receiving very little in return. Or perhaps the opposite has occurred. Maybe there have been moments when you knew exactly what needed to be said, yet you chose silence because the emotional consequences felt exhausting. Maybe you suppressed your frustration. Maybe you convinced yourself it was easier to avoid the conversation than to risk the disruption it might create. And while that strategy may have worked temporarily, tonight's astrology suggests the period of postponement is ending. The first quarter moon is not interested in maintaining comfortable avoidance. It is demanding movement. It is demanding truth. More importantly, it is demanding authenticity. The conversation that has been lingering in the background now wants to move into the foreground, not the edited version, not the carefully softened version. The real conversation. The one where you stop minimizing your needs. The one where you stop translating your feelings into language that makes everyone else comfortable. The one where honesty finally takes precedence over convenience. When I look at the karmic themes surrounding this moment for Aries, what stands out most is the idea of energetic balance being restored. If you've been carrying responsibilities that never belonged solely to you, the imbalance can no longer continue unnoticed. If another person has grown accustomed to receiving your effort without offering equal commitment in return, the universe appears ready to expose that pattern. The remarkable thing is that karmic justice does not necessarily arrive through punishment. Sometimes it arrives through clarity. Sometimes it arrives through a moment where truth becomes impossible to deny. Once you speak honestly, the dynamic itself must respond. Either the other person rises to meet you, accepting responsibility and contributing to a healthier exchange, or the structure begins falling apart because it was never capable of supporting transparency. In either outcome, freedom emerges. One path creates transformation. The other creates release. But both outcomes remove you from stagnation. Adding even more significance is the fact that Chiron has now entered your 2nd house, the area associated with self-worth, value, resources, and the relationship you maintain with your own sense of deservingness. This suggests that the lessons unfolding now are not merely about another person. They're about what you believe you deserve from life itself. The moment you stop negotiating against your own value, the entire landscape begins shifting. Emotional circumstances start reorganizing. Material opportunities begin aligning differently. Financial energy may even respond in unexpected ways. It is as though the universe has been waiting for a signal from you, waiting for proof that you are finally willing to claim what your soul already knows belongs within reach. And once that signal is given, movement accelerates. Then we arrive at Cancer. And Cancer, this message carries an emotional weight that is impossible to overlook. If there is one sign experiencing this lunar event in an intensely personal way, it is you. The sun has just entered Cancer, beginning your season, your annual cycle of renewal and self-awareness. Yet almost immediately, the cosmos presents a challenge through this powerful square from Libra. The timing is meaningful because it places your own needs directly under a spotlight. And when I look at the pattern many Cancer individuals have been living through recently, a familiar story emerges. You had been the caretaker, the protector, the emotional foundation upon which everyone else leans. You have been absorbing stress that did not originate with you. You have been anticipating other people's needs before they even express them. You have been adjusting your own emotional landscape so others can feel comfortable. And while there is beauty in that generosity, there is also a hidden cost. Somewhere along the way, many Cancers stopped asking a crucial question. What about me? What about my needs? What about my peace? One of the greatest challenges associated with Cancer energy is the tendency to mistake familiarity for genuine security. Something can feel familiar simply because it has existed for a long time. That does not automatically make it healthy. Something can feel normal simply because it has become routine. That does not automatically make it supportive. And tonight's lunar energy appears determined to expose the difference. The first quarter moon is illuminating the specific ways you may have sacrificed your own emotional well-being in order to preserve harmony around you. It is highlighting the compromises that slowly accumulated until they became invisible. It is revealing where caretaking crossed the line into self-neglect. The choice being presented is not easy, but it is straightforward. Boundaries are necessary, not with strangers, not with distant acquaintances, with the very people you care about most. This does not mean destroying relationships. It does not mean creating unnecessary conflict. It simply means allowing honesty to exist where performance has existed before. It means acknowledging when something hurts instead of pretending it does not. It means saying you are struggling instead of automatically reassuring everyone else. It means replacing automatic sacrifice with conscious choice. From a karmic perspective, what unfolds next becomes revealing. Relationships sustained entirely by your willingness to absorb everything may begin showing their true nature. Some may weaken. Some may even disappear. That process can feel painful because letting go of familiar dynamics rarely happens without emotion. Yet the relationships rooted in mutual respect will respond differently. They will adapt. They will honor the boundary. They will grow stronger because honesty strengthens healthy foundations rather than threatening them. And perhaps most importantly, you will finally experience the emotional safety you have spent so much time creating for others. There is another factor intensifying this experience. The Uranus square to the lunar nodes is activating profoundly unconscious territory for Cancer. This suggests that the patterns being challenged may not belong exclusively to the present moment. Some of them may have existed for generations. Some may have been inherited through family conditioning, emotional expectations, or deeply embedded beliefs about responsibility and love. What is being released now could represent far more than a personal habit. It could represent the breaking of an emotional cycle that extends further back than you currently realize. That possibility alone makes this moment incredibly significant. And then there is Libra. Libra, what is unfolding for you tonight carries a level of visibility that cannot be understated. The moon is moving through your sign at 0 degrees, positioned directly on the Aries point. Astrologically, this is one of the most public and amplified positions possible. It functions like a spotlight aimed directly at your experience, which means the developments connected to this lunar phase are unlikely to remain hidden. They are unlikely to remain subtle. Whatever reaches a turning point now has consequences that extend beyond private reflection. It becomes something you can feel, something others can see, something that carries genuine importance. And as we move deeper into what this means specifically for Libra, the story becomes even more revealing. Libra. The deeper I look at this alignment, the more convinced I become that the real story unfolding for you has very little to do with other people and everything to do with the version of yourself you have been presenting to the world. This is not about deception. It is not about pretending to be someone you are not. It is far more subtle than that. Over time, you have become exceptionally skilled at reading a room, sensing expectations, and adjusting your behavior, so that tension never has the opportunity to fully emerge. You know how to soften your edges. You know how to say the right thing at the right moment. You know how to create comfort, even when doing so requires setting aside pieces of your own truth. The problem is that after enough years of adaptation, many Libras begin losing sight of where accommodation ends and authenticity begins. Somewhere beneath all the adjustments, all the compromises, all the careful calculations about how your words might be received, there is a deeper voice waiting to be heard. There is a more honest version of you that has been standing quietly in the background, watching while the polished version takes center stage. Tonight, the square between the Cancer Sun and the Moon in your sign places that reality directly in front of you. It illuminates the emotional price of constantly reshaping yourself to maintain balance. It asks a question that cannot easily be ignored. How much of your energy has been spent preserving appearances rather than honoring your actual feelings? How often have you chosen acceptance over authenticity? How many times have you edited your truth because you feared what might happen if people saw the unfiltered version of who you really are? That is the crossroads standing before you now. One path continues the familiar pattern. It keeps the surface calm. It protects the image. It allows everyone around you to remain comfortable. The other path requires vulnerability. It requires honesty. It requires allowing yourself to be seen without constant refinement and adjustment. For someone whose instincts are naturally tied to harmony, that can feel incredibly uncomfortable. Yet the more I study this energy, the more it becomes clear that the harmony you have been protecting may not be as stable as it appears. Real harmony grows from truth. Artificial harmony grows from suppression. One creates connection. The other creates distance disguised as peace. And the universe appears determined to reveal the difference. What makes this moment so significant is that karmic justice for you does not arrive through conflict. It arrives through release. The moment you stop forcing yourself into roles that no longer fit, something begins changing almost immediately. The effort you have spent managing perceptions becomes available for something else. The emotional labor you have invested in keeping everyone comfortable begins returning to you. The constant monitoring of how others might react starts losing its grip. And as that happens, your energy shifts. Your presence changes. Your confidence becomes more grounded because it is no longer dependent upon approval. The Aries point activation surrounding this moon amplifies that transformation. It pulls hidden truths into visibility. It moves private realizations into public expression. It encourages you to step forward as yourself, rather than as a carefully curated version of yourself. The remarkable part is what follows. So many Libras fear that authenticity will create rejection. They fear that honesty will create distance. They fear that removing the mask will cause opportunities, relationships, and connections to disappear. Yet what I see reflected in this astrology is something entirely different. The more genuine version of you becomes visible, the more magnetic you become. The people who are aligned with your truth begin recognizing you. The opportunities meant for you start finding their way toward you. The relationships capable of supporting who you really are become stronger because they are finally built on something real. Instead of attracting others through accommodation, you begin attracting them through authenticity. And that shift has the potential to change everything. This is why the emotional atmosphere has felt so intense lately. If you have spent the week feeling unusually sensitive, if relationships have felt unstable, if there has been a lingering sensation that something important is approaching, there is a reason. What you are experiencing is not random anxiety. It is not simple stress. It is the culmination of multiple cosmic influences converging into a single turning point. Layers of pressure that have been building throughout the month are now reaching their moment of expression. And despite how uncomfortable that may feel, I do not see this energy as punishment. In fact, I see the opposite. This feels like correction. It feels like life attempting to restore balance where imbalance has existed for too long. If you have accepted less than you deserve, this energy seeks to reconnect you with your value. If you have given endlessly without replenishing yourself, this energy seeks to return your power. If you have hidden behind a version of yourself designed to make everyone else comfortable, this energy seeks to reunite you with your authentic identity. The symbolism of Libra has always been connected to the scales. Yet true balance is not achieved by endlessly adding weight to one side. Sometimes balance is restored only when something unnecessary is removed. Sometimes equilibrium requires honesty. Sometimes it requires endings. Sometimes it requires the courage to stop carrying what was never yours to carry. That is why resisting this process may only intensify the pressure. The feelings emerging now are not asking to be avoided. They are asking to be acknowledged. If a conversation has been waiting to happen, allow it to happen. If a boundary has been waiting to be established, establish it. If there is a truth living inside you that has been waiting for permission to exist, give it that permission. Not through anger, not through impulsiveness, not through destruction, through clarity, through self-respect, through a genuine understanding of your own worth. The individuals who work with this energy rather than against it are likely to discover something powerful. They may realize that the difficult choice was actually the liberating one. They may discover that what they feared losing was never truly supporting them in the first place. They may wake up feeling lighter than they have felt in months, perhaps even years, because the burden they were carrying no longer belongs to them. Clarity arrives. Relief arrives. A deeper sense of alignment arrives. Meanwhile, those who continue clinging to outdated dynamics simply because they are familiar may find the same lesson returning again and again. The universe has a way of repeating a message until it is finally heard. And if you're listening closely tonight, I suspect you already know what that message is. Deep down, the answer has been with you for quite some time. This first quarter moon is simply removing the last remaining excuses that allowed you to look away from it. And as we reach the end of this journey together, I want to thank you for staying present through this entire exploration. If these insights connected with something you have been experiencing, I would love to hear your perspective. Share what has been moving through your heart. Share the realization that has been surfacing. Share the decision standing in front of you. There is something incredibly meaningful about recognizing that countless people are navigating similar transformations under the same sky. Be gentle with yourself tonight. Trust what is being revealed. Honor what you know to be true. And when the next chapter begins, I look forward to meeting you there.